Hello everyone and welcome to yet another webinar from Synergita. We bring expert views, opinions, industry best practices and practical tips on OKR, PMS and HR trends. Let me start by giving introduction of today's guest, Brian Sommer. Brian is a senior consulting executive assisting client globally in major ERP and HR financial transformation projects. He pushes clients out of their comfort zones and into new processes, technologies, and business models. His career has focused on enabling major change for clients via software selections, shared services efforts, and for the last several years, a number of transformation projects. That experience significantly informs his market knowledge and his writings. Brian's software knowledge began when he joined Accenture. He started off rewriting a payroll package and eventually ended up leading Accenture's global software intelligence unit for a decade. He also headed up Accenture's global HR and finance centers of excellence and was quality assurance partner for many application software projects globally. Brian has won a number of awards for his writing on HR and ERP topics. He frequently contributes to Diginomica and has published several books on software, software negotiations, and digital transformation. Brian is sought out as a speaker and keynoter at major software events globally. He loves to talk shop with buyers and users of technology. He can be reached at mail, Twitter, and LinkedIn. I'll be sharing his addresses in chat box in case anyone of you want to reach out to him. Now, without further ado, let's start the conversation. First of all, thank you so much, Brian, for joining us today.
Happy to be here, and thanks for having me on this show.
Thank you, Brian, once again. As we navigate an increasingly complex and interconnected world, HR professionals find themselves at the forefront of addressing ethical dilemmas within their organizations, from ensuring fair and inclusive hiring practices to managing the delicate balance between employee privacy and corporate security concerns. The responsibility of HR professionals have expanded to encompass a wide area of ethical consideration. In our today's discussion, I want to seek your expert perspective on how do you define ethical challenges in the context of HR?
Well, I think the whole issue on the ethical challenges is growing tremendously, and I think HR people would be very, very wise to be in front of this kind of stuff. How I define the ethical challenges, I look at it in a couple of ways. One, are you saying one thing but doing another? Are you willfully turning a blind eye to bad behavior or bad technology or bad management and managers in your organization? Are you violating the trust of fellow employees? And are you putting one's interest ahead of another's? Any of those kind of present challenges from an ethical perspective and are going to be things that are going to really put stress, I think, on the HR organization. Particularly today, we have a whole new list of technologies that use artificial intelligence, and they open up another, a whole can of new ethical considerations that one must look at.
But many HR professionals are facing a growing number of ethical challenges in their work. These challenges have significant implications for organizations. Could you share your insights on the factors that contribute to these ethical challenges and how they are impacting organizations?
Well, like just a moment ago, I indicated that artificial intelligence is certainly one of many technologies that are creating a number of challenges in the ethics area. And the real question for HR executives is, do you have the time and the staff to go check these out in detail? Or are you just blindly using somebody's new black box tool without really fully understanding what it is, what it can do? So there's a time question, a skills question, and a discipline. And when I look at a lot of HR groups, they're full of great, well-meaning people who've got the pulse on what's going on with employees, but they're not trained as data scientists. They don't have mathematics or technology backgrounds and degrees. if they even saw the algorithms that are behind some of these tools, I don't think they'd know what they necessarily mean. So what we have is the technology is being developed by non-HR people, and it's complex. It is not for the faint of heart to look at some of this new stuff. And there's a real skills gap on what, whether HR can really understand it. That said, there are also some behavioral things that I think need to be looked at as well. There are people issues, particularly at the management level, that HR should be inserting themselves in, but frankly, a lot of times they don't get involved. And I'll give you an example. A lot of companies have tools that help them understand attrition and flight risk. Well, that's great in predicting who will leave next, but they never close the loop to find out what is the reason the person actually left. And yes, I know they'll say we do exit interviews, but the real question is, since about 62 to 67% of the time people leave because of their boss, when's HR ever going to go after the bad bosses, the psychopaths, the paranoids, the narcissist? They need to get them out of management to create a better work deal. And HR has to develop the skills, the capability, and the courage to do that. Anyway, let's keep going. Sorry, I got long-winded.
Yes, absolutely. But the emergence of AI technologies like ChatGPT has brought about profound changes in the HR landscape. However, it has also raised important ethical concerns. I'd like you to hear your thoughts on how the adoption of AI technologies has impacted HR and the ethical challenges associated with it.
Yeah, so these new technologies, the first thing I would say is if you don't understand the technology, you shouldn't be using it. It's an awful analogy, but it would be like giving a running chainsaw to a 4-year-old. You're just going to create a mess with something like that. We talked about the skill shortages in there, and if you don't understand the technology, you don't necessarily understand that there might be bias in the large data sets. With artificial intelligence, the software learns from your past data, and it looks at your internal HR data, and it can also look at external data sets as well. But if, for example, your firm did not have a good track record of hiring people of a certain either gender, disability group, a nationality, what have you, and the artificial intelligence program looks at your database, it's not going to find a lot of people in there. And if you use that for recruiting purposes, it's going to replicate that same history. So you have to be attuned to bias and know what you want to avoid. And HR has to have that kind of skill set to look at that. Another question is some of the external data, some companies want to send personal data about employees to an AI tool, and they're exposing this. That's what it's called. But what they don't understand is, even though they think they've anonymized the data so that nothing can be tracked back to an individual person, I've actually stood on stage with people in real time, and they show how they've been able to de-anonymize data and identify who the people were. They were using, in this case, it was automobile information, and they were able to figure out not only who the person was, but where they lived, who their mother-in-law was, and a whole bunch of other data. And they did it all real time, scared the daylights out of the people in the audience. But de-anonymization is actually there. So you want to be real careful with these new tools that you don't expose your employees' data to a third-party AI tool, because there may be a whole list of unintended consequences that could come back and cause a liability risk for your firm. Finally, I want to tell you some of these tools are going to be used by job seekers and employees, and they'll be used against HR. So HR has to be very aware of this. Right now, we're seeing people who are faking resumes, who are using AI to create the killer resume, or another thing is a lot of people are using artificial intelligence to make their current resume better. The net effect is you're going to get inundated with these incredible resumes that all read the same, look the same, and everything else, but they aren't truly reflective of the diversity of the workforce that's out there. So companies are going to get burned on this stuff. They're going to get burned by it, and they have to develop not only measures that they'll use themselves, but countermeasures to deal with the artificial intelligence usage by employees and job seekers. It's a new world for HR out there right now.
Absolutely. Also, obtaining employee data with explicit consent and ensuring compliance with privacy regulations are crucial for organizations. How do organizations go about ensuring that they acquire employee data with explicit consent and in compliance with privacy regulation?
Well, if you want to see an HR person get real nervous, tell them that they have to go get consent forms signed by all employees for every single application that HR uses. And the reason they get nervous is because many clients of mine, they may have 15 to 100 different HR apps, whether it's for employment verification or the payroll processing, what have you, and try to get consent forms on all those would be an administrative difficulty, to say the least. But you really need to know that you've got permission to do that. You could give people some blanket form, but you have to ask yourself, why are we doing that in a blanket way when we, because we probably just want to cover ourselves, not legally, not that we've fundamentally changed and made it so that we're not sharing this information with outsiders. Just recently, I had received notice that my identity information was breached again, this time by a provider who had sent my personal information to a third party that I never gave consent to, who then shared it with another third party, and that's the party that didn't have adequate security controls. Who's ultimately responsible? The first firm. They never should have shared all this stuff to begin with. And HR needs to realize that if you share employee information, even with someone like a payroll provider or a cloud provider, HR and that employer are still liable and at risk for this stuff. So you have to know where the information's going. And you might also think about, why am I using a third-party service to store things like passport information, social security numbers, driver's license, and other kind of stuff? Don't you just need to verify it, see it, and then why are you retaining it? Should you, in fact, maybe delete some of this personal information? So this is how the privacy deal gets really complicated with AI tools, because you expose stuff, and some of it maybe you may think is anonymized, some of it may not be anonymized at all, and then you don't have the consent from the employees to do that. That's very risky, and you don't want to go there.
Right. Protecting employee data from being sold to third parties without consent and in compliance with privacy regulation is a significant concern. Additionally, understanding software licenses related to HR tech solution is important to prevent potential data selling. Can you elaborate on the steps HR teams can take to thoroughly review and understand these licenses and prevent unauthorized data sharing?
Yeah, well, when a software vendor hands you a contract, invariably they're going to be non-disclosure or disclosure clauses, or confidentiality clauses, and there are even going to be limitations of liability around, is the vendor actually economically liable if they accidentally breach this stuff? And you got to think about it. How could you as a company just sign away the rights and remedies of your employees? The employees should be the ones who have a voice in this. Now, that practically is difficult to do, but if you're in HR and you're looking at a new piece of software, for example, you need to ask yourselves, why haven't I read the contract that came with each software contract, arrangement? And it's not just enough for you to hand it over to the legal department. HR needs to read it and they need to understand it. If you can't understand it, then you shouldn't be signing it. It's that simple. There also need to be substantial penalties for technology providers who disclose this stuff. And a lot of companies don't try to negotiate that in there. You would do your employees and your firm a great deal of, you provide a great deal of value if you insist on some significant penalties. Um, don't accept the standard contract. That just, the vendors produce those contracts. You want your contract, not theirs. You want your terms, not theirs. And you want to make sure that the employees have the right to claw back their information. They have a right to privacy. And the vendors won't like this stuff, but that's tough. I mean, it's all about the employee really, and their security, their privacy. Uh, One other thing is there are technologies that HR uses that frankly are really in the gray area ethically, like surveillance technology that use the camera on somebody's laptop to find out is somebody working or not. Well, the question you got to ask is, where else does that video go on the internet? Who else is seeing it? Did we give the vendor the right to also do facial recognition technology on that person? And is that facial profile being stored somewhere and used by law enforcement or what have you? There's so many questions, and many HR people just sign the contract without really understanding it. Again, if you don't understand it, don't sign it.
But using employee data without explicit consent can have several consequences for both employees and organization. Transparency and clarity in communicating the purposes for which employee data is collected and utilized in HR tech is vital. I'm interested to hear your insights on the potential risks and consequences of using employee data without consent and how organizations can ensure transparency in their data practices.
So there's a lot there, but let's just distill it to this. There are problems when in a work from home world, you don't necessarily know where an employee is actually doing work sometimes. And that may create new legal and nexus issues as to what privacy laws and rights do employees have in those locations. So just because your company's headquartered in one location doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the rule of law that applies when it comes to privacy and security. So bottom line is you need to err to the greatest extent possible for maximum flexibility on these points. Um, I I know of one company, they didn't even realize that one of their most important HR people was actually working in another country during much of the pandemic, which was, even though they paid them as if they were a US employee and they thought they were subject to United States laws. And they weren't even in the US for a large amount of time. So this happens. It's not supposed to, but it does happen. And you got to be prepared. So even if your country is based, even if you're all in India, for example, you may have others doing work for you all over the world that you didn't even know about, contractors, subcontractors, what have you, and just know that the liability will extend in all those areas. By the way, I do want to point out, I'm not a lawyer, but I negotiate gobs of contracts for clients all the time, and these are some of the kind of issues that we have to think about.
AI tools and algorithms may exhibit biases, and it's crucial for HR professionals to be able to identify and access these biases. Are HR professionals provided with training of resources to help them in this aspect? If so, could you elaborate on the specific training or resources available?
So there are training, you can take courses, you can become educated on this. There are people who get college degrees and these kinds of things. That's true. the typical HR person that I run into, this is not where their education background comes from, and they're going to need like college level courses in all likelihood to really get caught up on this. A lot of the skills we're talking about here, they're very specialized skills. You know, you have to have a background in things like algorithms, math, big data, data sets, how all these like machine learning utilities work, what are the technical underpinnings behind them, and then you get into the fun stuff like how do we check for bias, and that is that's just one example of where you've got to do some additional education. HR leaders may find it a whole lot easier to go find some individuals with these specialized skills than try to turn HR generalists into, you know, AI and big data kind of experts. But don't expect finding those people to be real easy either, because the AI specialists, because it's hot right now, and those are hot skills in a hot market, and those people can probably get any kind of salary that they're looking for. They're just not enough of them right now.
Right. And while AI-driven systems like ChatGPT offers numerous benefits, they also come with potential risk in the HR domain. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the risk associated with heavily relying on AI-driven systems in HR functions and how organizations can mitigate these risks effectively.
So with a lot of really cool demonstrations you'll see today from HR vendors on AI involve things like, oh, look how easy it is. We can just tell the AI bot that I want you to write up a job description for an ad. We need a, I don't know, a Java developer or Python developer. And the software will actually, with a few parameters, it will give you a pretty good job description that it pulled together. Now, how did it do it? It's been trained on looking at job board sites all over the world, and it pulled all that information, put it together. You can also find chat bots that are AI powered that will answer a lot of common questions that come into HR. That's, you know, all these sound good. The issue though is you can't rely on the AI technology to do everything for you. In fact, you need to spend time looking at whatever results come back from an AI tool to make sure it actually does fit exactly what you want or need. It can only look at other people's work or things that happened in the past. You have to update it, make it current, and make it relevant for your firm. So the risk here is if people just rely on AI and accept stuff at face value, they're going to get burned, because it's not really that smart. It just happens to look at all the stuff from other places and knows how to put it together well, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing for your firm. So you'll definitely want to take care before you just embrace this stuff wholeheartedly. The flip to that is there are going to be a bunch of it will find data that it was trained on that's not correct. There was a great article in MIT Technology Review, and they went looking in there and they found one of the databases, a major database that even a lot of recruiters use. They found over 1,000 LinkedIn profiles from people in China who apparently had worked for SpaceX as engineers and all went to pretty much the same university and then got a master's degree in the United States. And it turned out, looks like all these may have been faked resumes. So if you have an AI tool whose data came from faked data, then the AI results aren't going to be any good either. So be careful with what you use on this artificial intelligence generated content.
Yes, maintaining data privacy and ethical standards is paramount when utilizing employee data. What steps can organizations take to ensure data privacy and uphold ethical standards while utilizing employee data in their HR processes?
So I think one thing I really need to emphasize with people is when you get past all the hype around the new stuff, is you need to do a lot of testing, A/B testing. Take, for example, like if you're going to use it to rank order resumes that you've received in, much like what an ATS does, an applicant tracking system, what you want to do is you want to take like 200 resumes and you give them to your recruiting team, and then you take 200 resumes and run them through the AI, artificial intelligence tool, and you want to see if the AI tool ranks them in the same way that your human being based recruiters did. If they didn't, this is an A/B test, then you need to find out why. And were the people messing up, or was the AI tool making the mistake? A lot of people buy a lot of advanced HR technology, whether it's for recruiting or it's for flight risk, or who knows what, performance management or succession planning, but they don't test it, and that's wrong. You need to do test on this stuff, not once, but every periodically, as the tools learn more about your business and they get more data sets that they apply to their learning. You need to make sure that they're doing this stuff correctly.
In addition to employee personal data safety, creating a culture of psychological safety is essential for HR professionals to promote open communication and support employee well-being. How can HR professionals foster such a culture, and what strategies do you recommend for encouraging physiological safety in the workplace?
I think a lot of HR professionals would be surprised to find out how little people trust HR. And I know they're going to be shocked when I say that, and they're going to violently disagree with me. But remember, HR are the same people that run employee experience surveys all the time, and they want to know, how do you feel working at this company? And nobody tells the truth on that, because no matter how many times HR says this information is strictly confidential and we would never share it with your boss, they share it with a person's boss. And people have been burned on that before. So there is a credibility gap out there to begin with. If you're going to, if you want to create this psychological safety, that encourages all this communication, then you can't just say you're going to do it. You have to demonstrate this. You have to show people that there are public consequences if that trust is violated. But you also, so if somebody comes to HR and says, I have a problem with my boss, they expect HR to do something about it, not just listen to it. So you can't create this safety net if you can say you're creating one, but it doesn't exist until you actually start doing something on it. Anyway, that's the short answer on that. I mean, but again, unfortunately, trust is something that must be earned. And I think HR people need to actually think about, how do we earn the trust of people, not tell them that we are going to be this trusted, advisor for them. Big difference.
Yes, staying updated on emerging ethical challenges in the HR field is crucial for HR professionals. What are some effective methods or approaches for HR professionals to stay informed and keep up with the evolving ethical landscape in their field?
So a couple things jump to mind. I like having like brown bag Friday lunches, and you invite in like a cool HR vendor, or have them on a WebEx or something in the conference room, and they get to show people what is the art of the possible. It's one thing to talk about this stuff from a theoretical perspective, but when you see it and you get to when people see it, they get to ask questions, and that's when they really get to see, not only what is possible, but maybe what they don't want to do as well. So I like the brown bag deals. I also like rotating different discussion topics. So it's not just about technology. It's, what do we do to create, like you said a moment ago, a culture of trust? What is it going to require to make that happen? Talk about data privacy, and how do you know that the data is actually being held and protected in a very private way? You might even challenge some things like, are there things that HR is doing that maybe aren't as ethical as you like. For example, are you looking at employees' social media profiles and finding out, are they updating profiles? And is that going to be a trigger warning for you that maybe they're going to change employers? But the ethical question is, should you even be looking at this stuff in the first place? Anyway, I would change the topics, also invite in some technology leaders, both inside your organization as well as from other firms, have them talk about some of these current issues with your team so that they are aware. All of this is about becoming the most cosmopolitan HR professionals that you can be. And the more cosmopolitan, the more aware you are, then the better and more, you're going to be, and the greater the value you deliver to your organization.
HR professionals seeking to enhance their understanding and ability to tackle ethical challenges can benefit from various resources and professional development opportunities. What recommendation do you have for HR professionals seeking to expand their knowledge and skills in addressing ethical challenges in their work?
Well, I think the best HR people are the ones who sometimes hang out with a lot of non-HR people. Or they hang out with HR people in other organizations. They compare notes. They talk to people in legal. They talk to people in procurement and contracting. They're talking to top executives all the way down to they talk to a lot of the rank and file employees at the bottom of, if you will, of the pay scale. An HR leader that only talks to a couple of folks is not very effective at all, and is not going to be, well, they're just not going to be effective. I think for professional development, I also recommend that you go to a great HR show maybe once a year or two, because that's how you're going to see all the other technology that popped up since the last time you were there. It's how you become current. You don't just go to the show to go pick up tchotchkes in the expo hall. You go to talk to all the different vendors and your peers and other companies. You use the time during like the lunch breaks to rub shoulders with people. You do it to become much smarter and much more informed. That's the best kind of resource out there.
Before we take our last question, I request our audience to drop their questions, if any, in the chat box. As we
Okay.
conclude our discussion, as we conclude our discussion on growing ethical challenges in HR, I'd like you to share any final thoughts or key takeaways that you believe are important for our audience to consider in light of these ethical challenges.
All right, final thoughts. HR, just because it is the most people-focused area of a company. I mean, it's all about hiring people, paying people, developing their careers, helping them with training, dealing with changes in life events, and eventually offboarding them, if you will. It's all about people. And ethics involve the interaction between one person to another, and or with organizations, with people. So HR is like right in the middle of these ethical issues. Probably the most important thing I'd like you guys to remember is, with all this new technology, just because the technology exists doesn't necessarily mean that you want to use it. There are some real risk associated with some things, and some products just frankly are very immature. So look at all of this with the wide-eyed wonderment of a like 9-year-old. It's like, wow, this is cool stuff. And then switch gears and ask yourself, but is this really the right thing to do? How could this be misused or abused? And then also think about what kind of countermeasures should our company adopt if we are finding, let's say, employees are misusing, or job seekers are misusing this technology. So again, be cautious at first, build in the protections, and be thinking very carefully about how this stuff is going to happen. We're not in the old days of just automating a transaction. It's a whole new world right now. That's it.
Thank you, Brian. Brian, we have received one question. So the question is, with the rise of remote work and the use of employee monitoring tools, what ethical consideration should organizations keep in mind to respect employee privacy while ensuring productivity and security?
I got to think about that one because there's a lot in that. So I'm trying to think of a short, fast way to answer that. Maybe the best thing I would say is find some allies in like your data security group or whatever, have them sit down with you and go through some of the new opportunities you're investigating to make sure you really understand what's coming up and what's going to happen. One other thing I would tell you is if you're a smaller company, you're more apt to be pushed into using tools that AI tools in particular that are trained on large data sets, maybe that were gleaned from other companies that are much larger than yours, and that's fine to one extent. But your firm is going to be unique. It's always going to be unique, and what benefit you're going to get out of this stuff is going to be more limited. I would be more cautious than ever. Let me rephrase that. The smaller your company is, the more likely you're going to run into AI tools that are not purpose-built for you, and that will create some ethical issues. The larger companies are going to find that the generalized tools are just that, too general and not specific enough for all the little nooks and crannies in your organization and what it needs to get done. Again, this is a, to use that Latin phrase, caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. This is the world we live in today. Just beware.
Thank you so much, Brian, for sharing your expertise with us. Also, thank you to all the registrants and attendees. We hope that you found this session informative and valuable. We'll be back with another interesting topic on another day. Until then, cheers. Thank you, Brian.
Okay, thank you.